The prevalence of this spalling issue is more prevalent the closer you get to the coastline.
Got it.
Now,
that
it's
problem.
not to say that in places like, Oklahoma, Nebraska, Montana, more inland, that this doesn't happen. It just happens at a lesser rate. It's basically what I call it a cancer, so that people will understand. When I talk to all these boards, across the entire Florida, I tell them this is like a cancer. You need to take it out. Once you see the cancer and you don't do anything about it, it's just going to continue to grow.
HOA Insights is brought to you by 5 companies that care about board members: Association Insights and Marketplace, Association Reserves, Community Financials, HOA Invest, and Kevin Davis Insurance Services. You'll find links to their websites and social media in the show notes.
Welcome back to HOA Insights, Common Sense for Common Areas. I'm Robert Nordland, and I'm here today for episode number 84 with a special guest on the serious subject of preventing another Champlain Tower South tragedy. He's an engineer and an author with a book on the topic, which I have right here on my desk. And we first connected back in 2022. It's time to have him on the program and share some of his insights with you. Well, I hope you enjoyed last week's episode number 83 with regular co-host and insurance expert Kevin Davis discussing challenging insurance requirements. And if you missed that episode or any other prior episode, you can find them on our podcast website, hoainsights.org, on your favorite podcast platform, or on our YouTube channel. But better yet, subscribe to the podcast in order to get every episode delivered right to your phone or mobile device. Those of you watching on YouTube can see the custom mug I have here, HOA Insights, the cartoon on the back that I got from our merchandise store, which you can browse through from our hoainsights.org website or the show notes. You'll find we have specialty items like this and free board member Zoom backgrounds. And as a special promotion, go to the merch store, browse through the items, pick a mug that you'd like to have, and if you're the 10th person to email podcast@reservestudy.com with your name, address, and mug choice, and mentioning episode 84 mug giveaway, I'll ship it to you for free. Well, we enjoy hearing from you, and most episodes are in response to a topic or a question that you've submitted. So we do ask you to stay in contact, letting us know what questions you have or topics that you'd like to hear more about. So leave us a voicemail at 805-203-3130. Leave a comment on the YouTube video or send us an email at podcast@reservestudy.com. But back to today's episode. This topic is on me. Greg Batista, professional engineer, PE, is the owner and founder of G. Batista Engineering and Construction, has over 3 decades of engineering and construction experience. He's a trusted expert in the field with a history of managing projects from design to completion for single-family homes and high-rise condominiums. One of his clients was Champlain Towers South. His inspection in 2017 found significant damage, but his report to the association failed to prompt any repair work. And that's the key here. The board had early clues as early as 2017. So we've learned that ignoring such warnings can lead to loss of life. His book, Negligence, Averting Disaster at Your Building, Lessons Learned from the Champlain Tower South Collapse, I've got here on my desk. I've enjoyed reading it. It's available on Amazon. He continues his work inspecting buildings, advocating building safety measures, and educating his Florida clients on new inspection requirements and the importance of building maintenance. So, Greg, welcome to the program. I expect you're busy inspecting buildings nowadays.
Oh, yeah, we're busy. And by the way, thank you for having me on your show.
It's a pleasure. I have you on the show because I sense that this whole issue not only is something you're knowledgeable about, but it touched your heart. Tell me why it touched your heart.
Well, I come from a family of a lot of teachers and psychologists and people that just love to help people, and I just have that in my veins. But I gravitated towards the construction and engineering, and basically what we do as engineers is we guard the public safety. We first and foremost in our line of work is that we guard for the safety of the people. That's why we design buildings the way we do, the bridges and all those structures that we live and work in. So, having gravitated to that, I feel like it's something that when I go to these homeowners associations, that I take it upon myself to act as a teacher of sorts and let people know how important it is to maintain the buildings and how important it is to put priorities in a certain way so that, at the end of the day, that they're safe.
Good. Let's follow up on that. How important it is to maintain the buildings. Talk to me about maintenance and preventive maintenance.
Well, I mean, we can be talking about that topic for days here on this because, it's something as simple as paint. Right? Something as simple and as inexpensive as paint goes a huge way in making your building go from maybe having a longevity of 50 years to maybe 100 years, right? Because the paint on the building is like the skin. If you're looking at your skin is actually your first line of defense for, keeping germs out and for causing infections. The same thing is paint. People in some condominiums, they haven't painted their building for 10 years, 15 years.
Ouch.
Which is to me, it's just insane. And I know it costs a lot of money, but the pain that it's going to cost on a long-term basis is just incredible. So something as simple as paint keeps the water, keeps the chlorides from coming into your building and not only causing, moisture problems in the building, but it keeps these chlorides, which are so prevalent on the coastal regions, especially here in Florida, from getting entrained into the concrete and causing the damage to the reinforcing steel that's inside. Because once the reinforcing steel inside gets these chlorides, it starts to rust. And if it starts to rust, it starts to expand. And that's what causes that structural instability, which was one of the things that went wrong over in Champlain Towers that caused the collapse.
Well, I remember, I'm a mechanical engineer myself, and I remember I grew up in the Pacific Northwest, and I remember seeing a video of the Narrows Bridge collapse. They called it Galloping Gertie because it moved when the winds blew through. And I remember asking my teacher, well, what was that material made of? I expected it was asphalt, and I was so surprised to learn that it was a concrete driving surface because as a person, as a human in this world, you think that concrete is hard. You think the concrete is strong. It's like a rock. And then you realize that no, concrete flexes, and it's not good in flexing situations. And not only that, it's porous. Concrete absorbs water. And these are things I'm learning in college. And I think the average the citizen, the average human, the average board member doesn't appreciate that it's not just the water that gets in, soaks in, and then in cold climates, you have a freeze-thaw cycle that's going to pop things off. You're going to get that in warm climates. And so talk to me about what we call spalling.
Well, let me just backtrack a little bit because you mentioned something's just fascinating. The Tacoma Narrows Bridge is a fascinating story of how things are built and how we are able to learn from tragedies that happen. Right? You had this Tacoma Narrows Bridge, and it's a fascinating story. So look it up on Google or YouTube. You'll see it.
YouTube. Watch the video.
Yeah, you'll see this thing going up and down, and it was a 18-mile-an-hour wind because it caused natural harmonics in the bridge that it moved.
Okay, to our audience, this is two engineers geeking out on something. So we'll get back to condominiums in just a minute.
So it's so fascinating. But the thing is that you had a 19-mile-an-hour wind, but it started moving the bridge a little bit. So the bridge moved so much that it just eventually collapsed. And it goes back to this whole engineering concept with which we're learning in Champlain Towers, which these tragedies happen. We have to find out why they happened, and we go about trying to fix whatever it was that went wrong. Now we're incorporating dampening of the harmonics on the bridge, and it doesn't happen anymore, or it's been completely minimized. And going back to what you said about concrete, yes, if you were turned into a really small creature, like the size of an atom, you could literally run through the little nooks and crannies and go out to the other side. It's like a sponge if you put it under a microscope enough. So you're right; those are perfect things that you were saying. Yeah. So the original question, yes. So
where were we?
Yeah, where were we? We're geeking out.
Spalling and taking care of your building. You started with painting.
Okay, so let's assume right now that you don't take care of the paint in your building, right? Okay. So right now you're leaving a path open, an opening in the cave, so to speak, of where the surface of the concrete where these chloride molecules that are in the air, chlorides, but it's basically salt, right? These molecules that are in the air that are you don't see them, but they're there. You can smell it in the ocean, right? So these molecules that are in the air, they go inside the concrete, and once it gets to the steel, what's going to happen? As anybody knows, that when you're next to the ocean, whether you have a car or a steel lawn chair, it's going to rust. So when you get that piece of steel, which is basically, maybe let's say that it's a 1 inch in diameter piece of steel, once it starts to rust, it can expand up to 7 times its original diameter. So just imagine a piece of steel inside the concrete, it expands 1 time, 2 times, 3 times, 4 times. Once it gets to 4 or 5 times, that concrete is not going to be able to withstand the pressures that steel is exercising on it. It just pops. I mean,
Right.
Literally, it just pops. And sometimes you go to these buildings and you see, a big piece of chunk of concrete that comes down from the buildings, and sometimes it hurts people, sometimes it kills people. It falls on cars, and it's not only damaging to the people that are there where these things are falling down, but obviously it leads eventually, if not treated in a timely manner, it can lead to a collapse, such as what happened in Champlain Towers.
Yeah. Well, let me follow up on that. So we're talking about, I want to say, just painting. So when you go to a building and you see a chunk has fallen out, that's not just that the concrete was loose and old. That could be a sign of internal pressures popping it out, and the internal pressures from the steel, the iron-based product, that when you see a piece of rebar that is rusting, it's bigger and it's rougher. And that's that internal pressure that's going to be popping the concrete out, that is an indication that it's probably a lot of other places also. Is that fair?
That is absolutely correct, because if you see that happening in one side of the building, obviously you as a normal conclusion, you're going to say it's got to be happening in other sides of the building, because the building built at a certain time, and exposure to the water at a certain time. So yes, but on a lot of these buildings that are next to the ocean, you'll see that the closer you get to the ocean, right, the worse it is, and the further away you get from it, the less prevalent it becomes. But nonetheless, it's very prevalent along all these buildings that are along the coast.
Right. Okay. So you've got the waterfront, oceanfront, like Champlain Tower South. You've got inland, which could be, let's say, the middle of Florida. You've got the middle of the country, which I'm looking at my map here in my office, could be Nebraska, could be Oklahoma, Colorado. But those are all different situations with similar but different problems. And so every building has warm and cold temperature cycles where the building is growing and shrinking every 24 hours. In colder climates, you've got the freeze-thaw cycles. In, let's say, Chicago, you have the wind cycles where the building is going to sway with the wind. And so I guess I want to be clear to our audience that this is not a Florida coastline problem. This is an everywhere problem.
Yeah, the prevalence of this spalling issue is more prevalent the closer you get to the coastline.
Got it.
Now,
that
it's
problem.
not to say that in places like Oklahoma, Nebraska, Montana, more inland, that this doesn't happen. It just happens at a lesser rate. It's basically what I call it a cancer, so that people will understand. When I talk to all these boards, across the entire Florida, I tell them this is like a cancer. You need to take it out. Once you see the cancer and you don't do anything about it, it's just going to continue to grow. And this is unlike what you're talking about, which is like the freeze and thaw cycles, which is basically, if you have something that's undergoing a freeze and thaw cycle, it's not something that's as insidious as spalling, but it's not something that's going to continue to grow over time necessarily.
Right, because that was a weather-related event.
Correct.
Okay, all right. I want to introduce a couple more things, and that is, we're talking about painting. And painting, I think of generally as the vertical surfaces, but we're also talking about the balconies and decks, which are horizontal surfaces, talking about planters into which we intentionally put water, which is sometimes crazy to think. And then we have roofs. And in my world, I call that the building envelope concept, trying to protect the building envelope. So are those primarily the kind of things that you're looking at when you're looking at a building?
My companies, I have a construction company and I also have an engineering company. That's what we specialize in. We specialize in existing building envelopes. The envelope is basically your skin. Like I said before, the analogy was the paint, but it's not just paint. It's the windows, right? It's the doors. It's the sliding glass doors. That's part of the envelope. It keeps all the wind and rain and stuff from coming in.
And the caulking around the windows.
It's the caulking, everything that keeps rain. That comprises, everything comprises the envelope. And if that integrity of all those components and materials working together is somehow compromised, then yeah, you're gonna have a problem. So other things that might be included as part of the envelope is, like you said, is the roof. So the roof is the envelope. You've got the paint. Sometimes you have like waterproofing. Waterproofing is typically what you would put on your horizontal surfaces, your floors, your decks, your balconies, that work in conjunction with the paint that's on the vertical surface. And sometimes between the paint and the waterproofing, you would have a caulking cat bead or something like that. But those are all things that engineers get very involved in to make sure that this envelope is working as a whole.
Okay. Well, we've introduced a couple of words, a couple of concepts. Number one, concrete is not as permanent or strong or doesn't have as much integrity as we often give it naturally. Number two, we learned about the words like building envelope. A building is an envelope. An envelope is not just something that you put a letter in. Building envelope. We talked about spalling. Spalling is the cancer, the skin cancer, where a building is saying, I'm having problems.
It's more like a bone cancer because it's inside the skin. Because the skin breaks, it allows those bad things to get to your bones, and then it causes bone cancer. Because once the bone gets damaged, you're not going to be able to stand up, and that's where the collapse happens. Because it's actually your bones, which is analogous to the concrete, that allows you to sit up on your chair, allows you to walk, allows you to stay standing up.
Fantastic. Okay, we've talked about a lot of basics here. And I look forward to speaking a little bit more with Greg about now what to do about this. But it's time to hear from one of our generous sponsors, after which we'll be right back with more HOA Insights.
Are you part of a homeowners association or condominium board? Making the right financial decisions for your community's future is crucial. At Association Reserves, we're proud to serve communities nationwide, specializing in reserve studies tailored to your community's unique needs. Our expert team helps you accurately assess your property's assets, forecast future expenses, and develop a solid funding plan. Whether you're a small HOA or a large condominium association, we've got you covered. Visit reservestudy.com to learn more and get a proposal for your association.
And we're back. Well, Greg, just fascinating foundation that we've laid here, but we want to give our board member audience some more education, some more teaching points on what do they do about it? Because we're talking about a building, and you and I and the average homeowner has become a board member because they want to take care of the building, they want to take care of the common areas, but how? And Greg, tell us, who does the kind of inspections? Who are the kind of experts that you are? How do board members find them all around the country?
Well, I'll first start off by saying that my heart goes out to all these homeowners association board members, which they have a largely thankless job of dealing with these things. And I talk to these people day in and day out, and 99.9% of these people, they want to do the right thing, right? You hear all these horror stories, but it's my experience that everybody wants to do the right thing. And in trying to do the right thing, sometimes they make bad decisions or good decisions. So I think it's incumbent upon those professionals that are in the field to really put some importance on actually teaching these people and teaching them in terms that they understand. This is one of the reasons why I congratulate you, Robert, because you're doing a tremendous public service here.
We've got a good team, but yeah, we want to help board members.
Yes, because and that's to me, that's the key. If you go to my website, askgbatista.com, you're going to go into a section that has books. I've got free literature, everything from pulling permits, how to hire an engineer, how to do, new windows and doors, hiring an owner's rep. I've got so many books out there, and they're free, and they're written in a very easy to understand type of language. And I get congratulated all the time by these people on the boards because knowing that they want to do the right thing, nobody actually has like some resources out there that speaks their language. It doesn't matter whether it's Florida. There are some things that have to do with Florida and the permitting, but it's really something that it's some resources that can be used nationally if you want to, go and check it out.
Okay. So your website again, where they can find that?
AskGbatista.com.
Got it. Okay. I knew that we're going to have some people who are stopping the recording and going back and trying to find that, so I wanted to give it to them twice.
You got to wait till the podcast is over, then you can go. Having said that, right? You want people to really understand the issues, and I think that there's a big emphasis that if you don't know, because most of these people on the boards, they're either homemakers or doctors or don't know anything about construction, that they first understand that if you don't know, get help. And there's so many professionals out there. And if you live in Alaska and you see a crack on a building, you don't have to be an engineer to know that a crack, that might be something bad.
Yeah.
So call an expert and call people that are local to you, that understand the weather, understand the building departments, the codes that are local in those areas. So it's as easy as picking up the phone. Literally, it's just as easy as picking up the phone. And when you get a hold of them, listen to them, because they have experience and they've gone through education. But once you do that, I think that you've taken care of 99% of any issues that may come up.
Yeah, well, that makes me think of your work at Champlain Tower South. You were there in 2017. They hired you to inspect their planters on the pool deck area.
There was a leak, basically. It was a leak that was in a planter.
That was going down through the deck there into the garage. And now that we know those kinds of things are important, you can't let that go unchecked.
Yes, and absolutely, and it still pains me to have actually been there and said, look, this is not a planter problem. I understand this is a Band-Aid, but you have to go from a Band-Aid fix, which is the waterproofing, to an actual surgery to take out this cancer, right? So what I think happened in Champlain Towers, which is pre-Champlain Towers is so indicative of many other condos, is that they just kicked the can down the road.
Yeah, and people watching on YouTube can see I'm wringing my hands, because the board at Champlain Tower South had opportunities, and we want to give you the encouragement to, when you see things that you don't know about, reach out and get help from a professional. Okay, and when they give you wise counsel, take it seriously. They're the expert in their field. Now, Greg, what does a repair look like? What does preventive maintenance look like? Getting a professional inspection every 5 years, every 10 years? Does it depend on geography?
It depends on the building. So let me give you two different scenarios that are on extreme sides of the spectrum.
Okay.
The last building that I built as a general contractor was the Murano at Portofino. We finished it up like 20 years ago. I used to work for a construction company. That was the last high rise that I built. It was 20 years ago, 20 something years ago. But that building, yes, it needs some maintenance because of your typical maintenance stuff that happens on your typical building. So that building doesn't necessarily need any concrete repair or any inspections on a yearly basis, right? Now, let's go on the opposite side of the spectrum. I also have a client, and I'm not going to name the building, which is a 100-year-old building right down in South Beach, where it's basically falling apart structurally.
Okay.
And these kind of buildings, because they're old, because they're next to the ocean in Miami Beach, those kind of buildings, this concrete repair and the structural inspections, it's got to be part of a maintenance, of some sort of maintenance protocol. And it's got to be baked into, one of the more important things that you need to do in one of these buildings. And I tell my clients that they need to inspect these buildings on a yearly basis, because you might not see a crack show up on one of these buildings on year one, but you wait a year, you're going to see a crack, because, the like we were talking about before, you have the spalling as the rebar starts expanding. The rebar can already be expanding, but you're not going to see a crack just yet. It's about to crack, but it's not cracking. So if you come a year later, eventually, boom, it cracks, and that's where it shows. So you see that there's a stark contrast, and I think that the age of the building has a lot to do with how often you're going to be inspecting the building. But then again, these are the kind of things that your hired expert will be able to guide you through.
Yeah. Well, I want to follow up on one real quick word pair that you used, and you said baked into. And as you are working with your building, you have to appreciate, and correct me if you feel differently, a building is a living entity, and it's like a person. The older it gets, the more care it needs, and you have to give it that amount of care, and that means more budget. And so when you say baked into your plans are to have it inspected, you also need to bake into your plans the budget, because owning a building is expensive. Owning real estate in this country is expensive. And there's too many board members who I think are leaning on the side of minimizing the homeowner assessments and not giving the building what it needs. Do you feel the same way?
No, I think that the analogy that you use is fantastic. As a matter of fact, I use it quite often with the homeowners associations because it's a very accurate depiction and people can see it, right? Because you can say, look, your skin is like the painting, like we said. The bones is like the actual concrete, right? You've got your nervous system, because without your nervous system, you can't, see or hear or do things. That's like your electrical system. So everything's working in tandem. And this whole thing about like when you're a teenager, you think you're infallible. You're not going to go to the doctor. You don't need that stuff.
Superman.
And us 50-somethings, 60-somethings, we know better. We know better that we need to get our checkups, and we need to know that if there's something, if there's a blip on that that X-ray or something, you're going to get it checked out, and you're going to pay whatever money it needs to be. So that is a very powerful analogy, and I use it all the time. If you read the book Negligence, the book that you showed, I go through that. I mentioned it on several occasions.
I wonder if that's where I got it, because I'm using it more and more often. So that probably comes straight back to you, Greg. Now, another thing, so regular inspections and the inspection frequency is going to be based on where you are in the country, age of the building, things like that. But let's get back to this concept of protecting the building envelope. What's that look like? It looks like painting. It looks like sealing the decks. It looks like taking good care of the roof, making sure that the service people who go up onto the roof, if you have a multi-story condominium building, aren't beating up the roof as they're working on the air conditioner, and the pool deck, the planters. Talk to me about what it looks like to maintain your building envelope.
Okay, let's go over components, because the building envelope is comprised of components. And each one of these components has to work together, because you can have the best painting, the best waterproofing, the best windows, the best doors, but if your caulking is bad and substandard, you're done. And so
it's like a suit of armor.
Actually, exactly.
Your opponent's going to get you where your armor is weakest.
And that's exactly right. And that's where the professionals such as myself comes in, and we're building envelope specialists. So let's break down on brief bullet points each one of these components. Okay. Let's start from the top going down. The roof. The roof is, I think, the most important aspect of your building envelope, because that's where the rain hits. That's where it gets pummeled and lots of damage happens. So basically a roof, when you buy a roof, you get a warranty. And I always tell my clients, get a roof, get a good warranty, okay? Because and a lot of people, they don't care about that kind of stuff. All they say, oh, you know what? The building, the roof is in bad shape. Let's just put some schmutz over it and let's roll some stuff on it, no warranty. And I think that's a mistake. But we can have one whole episode just dedicated to this, right?
Okay. Let's talk about your bullet points.
Right. So that's the roof. Then you go to the paint. You already talked about the paint. Okay. The other important thing is the windows and doors. Windows and doors, they protect you. You see these windows and doors as things that are strong, but no, these windows and doors, if you look at them, especially the aluminum ones, they're all put together with rivets and welds and caulking, literally hundreds of pieces, and people don't realize that these are important components that need to be looked at. And some of them are old, and and a lot of people, what they do on these high rises, they change them out and they put in good hurricane resistant windows and doors. But windows and doors are extremely important. The other aspect is caulking.
Okay.
So caulking is basically a waterproofing that goes between either two different materials or at different angles, like vertical and horizontal. That in of itself is a whole science. There's all those sorts of different types of caulking. There's silicone, elastomeric, there's, acrylic. That's a whole science in of itself. But this all goes back to what I was saying earlier about that each one of these components is a science in of itself. Yeah. And if you get a good professional to come in and look at each one of these components, and you go a long way to making your building last a very long time.
Yeah, I want to stop you right there, because You don't have to become an expert in, let's see if I can remember, silicone, elastomeric, and
Acrylic.
Yeah, I couldn't even retain that for 15 seconds. You as a board member don't have to memorize that. You don't have to be an expert in it, because there are experts who can say, this is best for you in this situation. This other thing is best for you at a building across town. So rely on your experts.
Yes, absolutely. Absolutely.
Okay, and then you got more for all your other major components. You've got the sealing of decks. You have the sealing of planters. There's so many other things. Same general principles.
But I mean, there's another one. I mean, you can include waterproofing, because, waterproofing goes basically, that's on the horizontal. You could put, waterproofing on the wall, but just to keep things simple, you can put waterproofing typically on horizontal surfaces, like a planter, right? Yeah. Or like a balcony, right? So, if you have water ponding on your balcony, it's not going to seep down into the concrete. You're going to keep that water from going in. And paint doesn't necessarily have the properties to keep water out. That's basically ponding, where it would not pond if it's on a wall. So you have to have a special kind of painting that's a lot tougher, that can withstand holding water, for a certain amount of time. So again, all those components together, they just create that envelope, and it's so important.
And when I was imagining in my brain seeing ponding on a balcony, then of course we have to think about the draining system. So yes, if there's water that's collecting, it needs to drain down effectively and go away from the building. So that's yet another one of these body systems that you were talking about that needs to work together with everything else.
Absolutely.
Fascinating. Well, Greg, we could go on and on and on, and we may have to have you on for another episode in the future.
I would be happy to, Robert.
Well, that's great. Well, Greg, thank you for taking the time to join us on today's program. Thank you for the work you do to have a heart for board members and to promote building safety and integrity. So any closing thoughts for our board member audience at this time?
Yeah, don't think that you need to know everything. And like Robert said, rely on your professionals. They're the people that know. And that's if there's one takeaway that you get from this, it's just that.
For more information, or if you have follow-up questions, you can reach Greg and his team at G. Batista Engineering and Construction at info@askgbatista.com. And remember, his book, Negligence: Averting Disaster at Your Building, is available on Amazon. We hope you learned some HOA insights from our discussion here today that helps you bring common sense to your common areas. We look forward to having you join us for another great episode next week.
You've been listening to HOA Insights, common sense for common areas. If you like the show and want to support the work that we do, you can do so in a number of ways. The most important thing that you can do is engage in the conversation. Leave a question in the comment section on our YouTube videos. You can also email your questions or voice memos to podcast@reservestudy.com or leave us a voicemail at 805-203-3130. If you gain any insights from the show, please do us a huge favor by sharing the show with other board members that you know. You can also support us by supporting the brands that sponsor this program. Please remember that the views and opinions expressed in this program are those of the hosts and guests, with the goal of providing general education about the community association industry. You'll want to consult licensed professionals before making any important decisions. Finally, this podcast was expertly mixed and mastered by Stokelight Video and Marketing. With Stokelight on your team, you'll reach more customers with marketing expertise that inspires action. See the show notes to connect with Stokelight.